Hello! Welcome to Primarily Physiology. And I actually realized I was about to dive into respiratory stuff, but I just realized, you know what, I should establish a few terms that I'm going to be using a lot that matter a lot when you're talking about anatomy and physiology. And the primary thing for me, especially when you talk about voice training, is sensation versus perception versus like actual movement output, like what your body is doing. So this is stuff that tends to come from, a lot of coursework in neuroscience and things, and cognitive science. They talk about perception a lot. And we all use the word perception, right? Like, well, that's just how you're perceiving the problem, right? So, especially like in politics, right? Like, oh, your perception is wrong. And I always liked this one course I took where I had a professor who said that, everyone's perception is wrong in the sense that everybody has a different perception of things. And so this isn't news if you're an adult and have lived in the world for like longer than 2 days. It's not news that everybody's a little different and everybody sees things differently, right? But kind of the bigger picture of like what the heck this stuff is. Sensation, it's fairly easy to get. Your 5 senses, and then you also have like proprioception, which is like where you are in space. Like I don't have to look at my hand to know where it is. Like it's over there, right? And things like that. And so you have touch, and you have taste, and you have smell. You have all the stuff. You also have visceral sensation, like you have sensation of your gut, right? If you're hungry, or if you have stomach ache, or, if you're stressed out, or if you need to go to the bathroom or not go to the bathroom, like that's an internal sense as well. You have sensory nerves that are sending information to your brain about things like that. So, kind of the net effect, like what all this sensation does is you have these neurons, these sensory nerves, essentially, throughout your body, and there are various types that pick up various sensations, and they all carry a signal up to the brain, and it gets carried. The sensation, sometimes it can get kind of filtered out on the way to the brain by just having like different numbers of nerve cells. For example, you could have like 2 nerves down at your fingers or something. Let's say there's 2 of them that got stimulated, but the information got summed into like 1 that went up to the brain. Or conversely, you could have sensation that actually diverges and kind of goes up to different levels of neurons as you go up. So you have this like chain of neurons. You have sensation, and then it chains its way up, and it ends up at your brain and your higher cortical centers, where you have a lot of different neurons. But anyway, perception is what happens when you are aware of your sensation. So from the point where I touch my hand to where I'm aware that I've touched my hand, a little time has lapsed, just a little. It's very fast, and it's imperceptive to me, and it's imperceptive to you because I don't know the lag time. Like consciously, I am not aware of there being any lag time from touching my hand to actually perceiving that I touched my hand. But there was a lag time from when the neurons over here said, okay, we felt something. That signal went up to my brain, and then my brain became aware that something touched my hand. And I know I did it because I initiated the movement. But, right? So perception is after that signal, that incoming information has been processed a bit. It's been sort of filtered through and sent to the right areas of the brain to kind of know what to do with that information. And then using your perception, your body figures out what its next act is going to be. Like, how is it going to respond to the environment around it? Or how is it going to respond to something internal if it's like your gut or something, right? So that's a lot of it. That's a big thing. And so perception can be very different. And this is also why you can have movements that you do, like you can have what we call implicit memories. So you can have habits, essentially, that you do every day, and you don't have to think about how to do them. You just do them, right? Like if you've been driving long enough, driving becomes a habit. It becomes a habitual thing you just do. hopefully not with texting or anything, because once you distract things, that's a whole different matter. But, you know, brushing your teeth and maybe cooking, right? Like pulling out your pan and putting it on your stove is sort of habitual, right? Locking your door when you leave, which is why you might be like, did I lock the door? I don't know. Did I? Because if you stop to think about it, you're like, gosh, I'm never aware if I actually do it. I don't really remember it. I just know that it's a thing I do every day. Your body just knows to do it, right? And it's because there's a part of your brain that has learned these tasks, these habits are things that it just needs to tell your body to do, right? So your brain knows when you say, I need to go cook something, your brain knows where your pot is, how heavy it is, exactly like how the pot feels, and where to put it on the stove, and where to set the thing. Like all of that can be coordinated without you having to think very much about it at all. Because all you had to do is say, I'm hungry, time to cook. And your body knew what to do. Because there's a part of your brain that remembers that task, okay? The signal still came from a different area of your brain. It just wasn't the conscious area, the area that you had to like control every single bit and be aware of what you were doing. So awareness and like consciousness, like not consciousness in the like woo kind of way, but consciousness just in terms of like you're aware of a thing that's happening. Like you could actually put words to it and say, oh, okay, I see what's happening here, and I know every single step of what I'm doing. That's different sometimes than what you actually are physically doing, right? So your awareness, your perception of a thing, what you think is happening, might not actually be exactly what you're doing if it's something that's habit. And this is where a lot of the breakdown, I think, happens with voice teaching. Because we've all heard that, like, really great singers might make really bad teachers. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. And I think a lot of that is because if it's a habit, if your healthy, easy, awesome, professional level singing has become such a second nature to you that you just do it, and then you are asked to break it down into like digestible steps of how to accomplish that with someone who doesn't have that habit, it's really hard to figure out how to break it down, right? It's like learning to tie your shoes, you know? Like, I don't know, you know, for any of you out there who are parents or if you worked with little kids and they have, you know, like if you need to teach a kid how to tie their shoe as an adult, you're like, oh, shoot. What was that little, like, rhyme? There was a thing with the bunny and the ears and the what? I don't quite remember. Because you have to take a step back and go, how do I tie my shoes? How do I do this step by step? Because I just do it, right? Like, I've been tying my shoes for decades. I know what to do. And so that's what I think taking like professional level singing can be for a singer who's really amazing, or maybe even a singer who didn't have to work that hard. Maybe they always had a base level of like just habitually good vocal production. I was not one of those people, but they exist. Those people exist, right? Like freaking, you know, Sutton Foster got herself a Broadway show before she ever had like a voice lesson. So clearly she had a good sense of what she was doing before. She had some good habits in there that she needed to hone. So she needed lessons because she needed to know how to do it all the time. But, you know, like that person might not know where to start with this student who doesn't have any of those habits in place. So a lot of times, really good teachers, I think, come from the people who had to struggle a bit and who really had to work to develop that habit. They have a better understanding of how to get someone there because they had to do it for themselves. But that doesn't mean that good teachers can't come from people who have good habits. It's just they have to put in the time and the effort to learn how to break down the task and to build it up into a habit for their students. So, because you want your healthy vocal production to be a habit, so that when you walk out on stage, you can just focus on doing your art. You can focus on what you need to be focused on, not on the minutia of what you're doing. So that requires a certain amount of learning. It requires, you know, repetition to develop habits and things like that. But ultimately, it also, you know, one of the big keys, I think, is to align somebody's perception of what they think they're doing. Whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Like, you can think you're doing this with your ribcage and that with your abs, and it might be completely different than what you actually are doing, but it doesn't really matter if it works for you. So that's the really overarching message, is like, whatever works for you, works for you. And if it's not working for you, then you need to tweak it and change it. But, you know, heck, what the heck? And if you're teaching someone, you have to sort of accept the fact that not all your students are going to perceive movement the same way that you do. They're not all going to have the same sensation of things happening that you are having. And so you might have to play around a little bit with how to get a production out of them. And a lot of that, excuse me, big frog in my throat. A lot of that comes from, that's where like the imagery comes in, you know, the metaphors, the like, imagine you have blah 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 in your throat, or imagine your lungs are in your stomach, imagine this and that, and like these kind of weird metaphors. A lot of that comes from the fact that however the heck, you know, the teacher's just trying to get you to a point where you are producing the right motor combination to elicit good vocal production. You know, you're producing good voice, and you don't know, you might not even know exactly how you're doing it, but somehow the conscious part of your brain, the aware part of your brain, took that imagery and then produced an output that was what you wanted. And you're able to sense and perceive from there. So that's the magic of teaching, of course. But I'm going to talk about sensation and perception a lot, and I'm going to compare it to like what might actually be happening in your body. And those things can be very different things. And that's where the big pedagogical divides and debates, I think a lot of them come from that. The fact that it's, you know, it's something that's rarely talked about in singing, but the nervous system and how your brain perceives stuff is so key and is so variable across people. Like the body parts that they need to focus on is so variable. And the sensations people have is so variable that it becomes a big fat debate, right? But you really, like, you get a book, like, you get Great Singers on Great Singing, get that book, and you can see, you can't really learn how to sing from any of that, because all of those singers have such different perceptions of what their singing is, and they have very different sensations when they do sing, and what they focus on and what works for them is so different, right? And it's not necessarily because one person is singing better than the other person. It's because they're just different people, and they just literally have a different body, different sensations, and different perceptions that work. So their brain works in different ways. That's pretty much it. So, sensation, perception, and then physical actuality. Different things. A lot of research into physiology is interested in physical actuality, because that's important stuff to know if you're going to ever do surgery or treat somebody with a drug at all. Like, well, not that therapists do that, but if you're like a medical doctor and you need to, like, you know, someone's developed a drug to help with this, or you have a surgery that can help with that, you got to know. Like, the idea is, what do I expect, like, normal to be? Like, where's baseline? And if I physically alter this thing, is it going to make a huge difference, and, you know, or not? So physiology on the basic scientific level is very interested in what is actually physically happening in a majority of the cases. And behavioral stuff, like how to maximize learning, how to create a habit in somebody, or how to teach somebody making something habitual, that is more interested in, it's not as interested in the physiology of actually what's happening, and much more like what works for the person, like what helps them to learn faster. Perception usually helps them to learn a lot faster, just working with their perception and going from there. So it's a balancing act, but I think a lot of singers get confused because we focus so much on what is actually physically happening in singing, and that's the mystery, and nobody knows what's actually happening. Well, we don't know what's actually happening in you when you sing unless we hook you up to a lot of instruments and see what you're doing, right? But do you need us to hook you up to instruments to learn how to sing? No, you don't, right? Doesn't matter. What works for you works for you. That's cool. We have some understanding of what sort of the baseline, the expectations are, at least at a large, big picture level, which is what I'll be talking about in terms of physiology and how things work together. Just the big picture level of how things work. And then I'll probably bring up a little bit of perception and what you might notice, what you might be aware of when those things are going on. So, alrighty. Now that I've introduced that idea, I'm going to bust out a little respiratory action today. I'll see you guys there. Bye!